In the winter of 1958, America was in love with the promise of the jet age. Air travel meant white-gloved service, polished aluminum, and the romance of faraway cities. Among the airlines serving a growing nation was Skyline Air, proud operator of the new Starliner twin-engine transport. Cut to a sweeping shot of Washington National Airport late afternoon. The sun drops behind the Potomac, glinting off the fuselage of Skyline Flight 202, bound for Nashville with a stop in Roanoke. Ramp workers in heavy coats guide baggage carts. A fuel truck tops off wing tanks. Inside the terminal, passengers gather beneath a brass-rimmed departures board. A stewardess in a navy suit calls boarding. Men in fedoras hand over paper tickets. Women adjust mink collars and clutch train case handbags. A trio of young country musicians laugh as they shepherd instrument cases down the jet stairs. Narrator. Flight 202 was a snapshot of an optimistic decade. Business travelers, honeymooners, a radio trio chasing a recording contract. For Captain Harold Vance and co-pilot Eddie Brower, the run south over the Appalachians was routine. In the cockpit, the pilots review weather maps. A cold front sliding across the mountains, bringing low clouds and scattered freezing drizzle. Vance, a veteran with 15 years in the left seat, checks barometric settings while Brower tunes an ADF receiver. Captain Vance. Bit of icing reported near Roanoke, but we'll stay on top of the deck. Brower. Roger. Temps dropping fast. I'll keep an eye on the carb heat. Engines cough to life, props spinning into silver discs. Passengers settle into wide leather seats, reading Life magazine or sipping coffee in china cups. The cabin hums with quiet conversation. As twilight deepens, the Starliner taxis out, lights winking against a backdrop of marble monuments. At 5:42 p.m., tower clears Flight 202 for Takeo. The aircraft rolls, lifting gracefully into purple dusk. Narrator. No one on board, not crew, not passengers, not the controllers who watched its climb, could know that Flight 202 was beginning its final journey. Before night's end, it would vanish somewhere among the fog-laden ridges of the Appalachians, leaving behind a mystery that endured for decades. Cut to black and white still of the airliner banking west, superimposed text. Lost in the clouds, the disappearance of Skyline Flight 202. Climbing away from the nation's capital, Skyline Flight 202 aimed west-southwest, charting a course toward the winter-dark ridges of the Blue Ridge and Allegheny Mountains. Inside the cockpit, the glow from analog dials casts warm halos across the pilots' faces. Captain Harold Vance levels the aircraft at 10,000 feet, settling into cruise. First Officer Eddie Brower tunes the ADF to the Roanoke beacon, pencil poised over a worn chart. Cabin service begins. Stewardess Claire Simmons balances a polished tray, offering steaming coffee and pound cake to passengers. The musicians hum a harmony, quietly rehearsing a chorus. Outside, the last light fades. Clouds build ahead, layered stratus, brushed by fine snow. The Starliner presses on, its wingtips haloed by St. Elmo's fire. At 6:11 p.m., Washington Center hands the flight off to Roanoke Radio. Brower checks in, reporting level at 10,000. Controllers note nothing unusual. Narrator. Then came the first hint of trouble, subtle, almost invisible. A fine rime forms on the windshield edges. Brower engages carburetor heat. Vance requests a slightly higher altitude. The airplane climbs to 11,000, skimming the cloud tops. Minutes later, they encounter light turbulence. A bump, then a brief shudder through the yoke. Instruments steady again, but the radio crackles with static. Vance frowns, adjusting the headset. In the cabin, Claire notices cups trembling on their saucers. She steadies herself, masking concern behind a calm smile. At 6:24 p.m., Roanoke Radio hears a clipped transmission. Skyline 202, icing moderate, requesting. The rest dissolves into hash. Controllers attempt to raise them without success. The radar return, a faint green echo on the glass screen.
Hesitates near the Virginia-West Virginia line, then blinks out. Narrator. One moment, Flight 202 was a silver speck against
twilight. The next, it had simply ceased to exist. Search planes scramble from Roanoke and Charleston, their lights carving circles through falling snow. Civil Air Patrol crews launch into rugged hollows, guided only by compasses and paper topo maps. Residents of tiny mountain towns step onto porches, listening for engines in the fog. Through the night, snow thickens. Lanterns glow in farmhouse windows as neighbors gather to discuss a faint boom someone thought they heard, or a streak of light glimpsed through mist. By dawn, the search grid is heavy with silence. The Starliner, its passengers, its crew, all swallowed by an Appalachian winter. Narrator. What happened in those lost minutes? Ice, turbulence, a mechanical flaw, or something darker? The answers would elude rescuers for decades, buried with the wreckage somewhere beyond the timberline. Fade to archival headlines. Airliner lost over mountains. Searchers battle storm. When the sun rose over the Appalachians on February 12, 1958, the fog that hid Skyline Flight 202 was still thick across the hollows. Search crews launched again at first light. National Guard C-47s droned slowly above the ridges, their observers peering through frost-flecked windows. Civil Air Patrol pilots traced valleys, eyes straining for broken trees or a wisp of smoke. On the ground, state police and forest rangers formed lines, trudging through knee-deep snow with dogs on leashes. In Roanoke, Skyline's operations office became a command post. Telephones rang non-stop as reporters sought details and families waited for word. Maps spread across oak tables showed penciled arcs where the aircraft might have gone down. Narrator. The search was relentless, but the mountains kept their secret. Rumors bloomed almost as quickly as headlines. Some speculated about sabotage, a mysterious man who'd checked in at Washington but never claimed his seat. Others whispered of a classified cargo bound for Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Local hunters swore they'd seen a flare drop behind a ridge near Paint Bank. A farmer told deputies of an engine sputtering over his barn before midnight. Each clue drew fresh teams into frozen ravines, only to end in silence. At a diner in Lewisburg, searchers thawed their boots beside a coal stove. One veteran pilot muttered that the Starliner's new de-icing boots were more show than go. Another wondered about radio failure. You lose bearings in this soup and those ridges are waiting. Newspapers printed sketches of the lost airliner, its silver fuselage gleaming beside headlines like, "Where is Flight 202?" Photographs of passengers. The musicians with guitars, the honeymooners smiling shyly, filled front pages, amplifying public anxiety. By the fifth day, storms thickened. A foot of snow buried previous tracks. Helicopters grounded, offing. Schulz scaled back air sweeps, shifting to selective patrols on horseback and snowshoe serrator. Each evening, families gathered by the radio for scraps of news. The search became a vigil, a contest between hope and the vastness of winter. Weeks stretched into months. Spring thaws revealed nothing but fresh green shoots where teams had camped. Skyline quietly retired the flight number from its timetable. But in mountain hamlets, stories lingered. Strange lights in the fog, muffled booms, or an unmarked truck seen late that night heading toward an old logging road. With no wreckage, speculation endured. From a secret military intercept to the wild notion that the plane had flown into another dimension. Narrator. For decades, Flight 202 remained an open wound, a tale told beside Appalachian hearths, its truth entangled with legend. Fade to sepia footage. Hikers decades later, walking along a lonely ridge with metal detectors. Half a century later, the story of Skyline Flight 202 still haunted the Blue Ridge. But new tools and new curiosity were about to shed light on the mystery. By the early 2000s, a small band of researchers, retired pilots, and local historians formed the Flight 202 project. Among them was Dr. Rachel Mendez, an aerospace archaeologist who specialized in locating lost aircraft. Armed with declassified weather charts, radar plots, and oral histories, she mapped every reported sound and sighting from that snowy night. Aerospace engineer Tom Latimer built a digital model of the Starliner's flight path. He fed in historical icing data, radio logs, and the aircraft's performance numbers. The simulation showed how a thin layer of clear ice, forming at just the wrong altitude, could have robbed the propellers of lift and stability within minutes. Narrator. For the first time, the puzzle pieces began to align. Meanwhile, volunteers scanned aerial photos from the 1960s, looking for scars on tree lines. One winter, a team on snowmobiles followed a half-forgotten Forest Service trail near Peters Mountain. At the head of a narrow draw, they found a mangled length of aluminum, its rivets and faded paint unmistakably 1950s vintage. Lab tests confirmed the fragment belonged to a Starliner airframe. Encouraged, the group organized larger expeditions, carefully combing the rugged terrain. More fragments appeared: a section of propeller, a seat frame, an instrument panel bearing Skyline's logo. News outlets seized the breakthrough. Camera crews hiked in alongside investigators, broadcasting images of twisted metal emerging from moss and leaf litter. Former passengers' families finally had a place to lay flowers. Narrator. But wreckage alone didn't answer the deeper question: why did Flight 202 fall? Records revealed the aircraft had undergone maintenance for de-icing. Equipment just weeks before the crash. Logbooks noted a technician's concern about weak pneumatic boots on the leading edges. In 1958, icing training for crews was limited, and icing forecasts were blunt tools at best. Dr. Mendez's report, released in 2009, concluded that structural icing most likely doomed the flight. Accretions on the wings and tail reduced lift until the Starliner stalled and descended rapidly, a loss of control compounded by poor visibility and outdated radio navigation. Narrator. The cause, it seemed, was not sabotage or the supernatural, but the quiet, lethal physics of winter flight. In Roanoke, a modest memorial plaque was dedicated to the passengers and crew. Pilots from nearby airports attended, as did descendants of rescuers who had searched in vain decades before. For them, the discovery closed a chapter and underscored how far aviation safety had come since the dawn of the jet age. Fade to a slow pan across the plaque, snowy peaks in the distance, as soft strings swell. With the truth of Flight 202 at last revealed, the tragedy became more than a tale of loss. It became a lesson. Dr. Rachel Mendez's final report didn't just catalog fragments of aluminum. It chronicled how a routine winter flight exposed gaps in 1950s safety practices. The Starliner had been a proud symbol of mid-century elegance, but its icing protection and weather guidance lagged behind the sleek image sold to the public. The FAA used the findings to illustrate how far aviation had advanced. Modern jets carry sophisticated anti-ice systems, weather radars, and satellite navigation. Crew training now treats icing as a disciplined science, not a minor nuisance. Narrator. From those frozen ridges came knowledge that has saved lives ever since. Families gathered each February near the memorial on Peters Mountain. They told stories of loved ones lost, the honeymooners, the bluegrass band, the quiet salesman who sent one last postcard from Washington. Instead of ending with questions, their stories now had context and dignity. At Roanoke's Aviation Museum, a small exhibit titled "Lost in the Clouds" opened, a glass case holding the aircraft's control yoke, a stewardess's brooch, and a weathered logbook page. Visitors lingered to read about the searchers who braved snowstorms and the researchers who refused to let the mystery fade. Narrator. Flight 202's legacy is one of perseverance, of people unwilling to surrender to silence. In a closing montage, archival black and white photos dissolve into vivid aerial shots of the same valleys today, quiet, green, and serene.
A voice from a recovered radio log crackles faintly, the crew's calm professionalism frozen in time. As the credits roll, the narrator's final words rise over a sweeping view of the Appalachians at dusk. Narrator, even as technology evolves, aviation's heart remains the same. People guides.
Getting people safely through the skies. The story of Skyline Flight 202 is a reminder that progress is written not only in blueprints and engines, but also in memory, and in the promise that such losses teach us to fly wiser.